Madam President, thank you for convening this briefing on the situation in the Middle East. I would also like to thank the Deputy Special Coordinator, Mr. Mohanad Hadi, for his briefing on behalf of Special Coordinator Tor Vennesland. Through you, Switzerland pays tribute to the central role of the UN for peace, stability, and humanitarian aid in the region. The Secretary-General, his senior representatives, and the UN agencies must be able to do their job, talk to all parties without hindrance, and help all those in need. On this International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, Switzerland reiterates its sympathy and support for the women and girls who are victims of violence in this conflict, particularly sexual violence. Such violence, attested to by the UN during the acts of terror perpetrated by Hamas on October 7, 2023, constitutes serious violations of international humanitarian and human rights law and may constitute war crimes or even crimes against humanity. We are also deeply concerned by reports of sexual and gender-based violence against Palestinians in places of detention during raids on homes and at checkpoints. In Gaza, the catastrophic humanitarian situation and the breakdown of law and order mean that women play an essential role in the response to the crisis. However, this also exposes them to a lack of privacy, with all its consequences for their hygiene and physical integrity. The suffering and dehumanization of all the victims of this conflict must come to an end. Switzerland reiterates its call for a ceasefire and the release of hostages, which must be unconditional and immediate. We deeply regret the non-adoption last Wednesday of the draft resolution of the elected members coordinated by Guyana, which had explicitly requested that. While the search for a council consensus for firm action must continue, the fundamental principles of international law, including international humanitarian law, have been agreed upon for decades. Obligations in this area apply in armed conflicts in all circumstances. These obligations include the obligation to treat all persons deprived of their liberty in connection with the conflict humanely, the prohibition on taking people hostage, the obligation to facilitate rapid, safe, and unhindered access for humanitarian aid, and the obligation to ensure the protection of civilians and civilian infrastructure, including UN personnel and premises. Moreover, as an occupying power, Israel has an obligation to ensure, to the best of its ability, that the basic needs of the Palestinian population are met. Switzerland supports any action that ensures accountability for serious violations of international law, including the acts of terror perpetrated by Hamas on October 7, 2023, and any other violations committed by the parties during the hostilities in Gaza, the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. With regard to the arrest warrants issued on November 21st by the International Criminal Court, Switzerland stresses that the independence of this judicial institution must be respected. It deplores all forms of threats or measures taken against the court, its officials, and those who cooperate with it. Madam President, Switzerland rejects all declarations aimed at annexing territory, developing new settlements, and taking measures that would introduce permanent changes, notably demographic and administrative changes in the occupied territory, both in Gaza and in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. We recall that the Israeli occupation, which has lasted since 1967, is illegal. Together with the settlers' attacks, threats, and intimidation, it constitutes a major obstacle to the solution of two democratic states, Israel and Palestine, of which Gaza is an integral part, living side by side in peace within secure and recognized borders. The destructive logic that prevails today must be countered by concrete efforts for peace, such as the Global Alliance for the Implementation of the Two-State Solution, launched here in New York in September. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Switzerland for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of China.